My name's Laura Wheeler and I'm the Community Manager for Digital Science. So a Community Manager, my initial role is to help build social networking sites and online communities around the things that digital science are doing. So that might be all the way from promoting some of our efforts at a portfolio company level, right through to promoting events that we organise and other activities that we're engaging with. Being a community manager is a great job. It wouldn't have existed 5 years ago. So it's relatively in its infancy. So I think there's a whole plethora of skills that you need to be a good community manager. So starting from, you need to obviously be quite familiar with the way the social web is working. So if you're active on things like Facebook and on Twitter and on Google+, that's an added advantage. But it really depends what you're becoming a community manager for. So it's all the same if you're being a community manager for a fashion company versus a scientific organisation. You're using the same skills, but what I'm doing is tapping into a specific community and engaging with those. So yes, I engage with these communities online, but I also extend that out to meeting these people in person too, at events and at conferences and giving talks to different institutions, etc. At school, I was always very focused on science. I did all science A-levels. So I've always had this sort of ingrained scientific interest, and that's just progressed on to university, throughout my career. I've always been involved in science in some capacity. So at school, I guess you can say it was clear that I was going to do something in the scientific realm, whether it be actually going into being a practicing scientist or going into a scientific field such as publishing or working in tools and technologies. I went to the University of Leeds and I studied biochemistry. My thesis was on the Ebola virus, and I looked at it from lots of different aspects, one of which was a bioterrorism aspect, because now scientists have been able to recreate the Ebola virus in the lab. So it was a very interesting political, I guess, viewpoint on science and how science can be used and implemented. I did do a couple of lab placements for, I guess, work experience purposes to see whether academia was the route for me, one of which was at the Royal Marsden Cancer Research Hospital. But I think for me, I decided that working in a lab as an academic wasn't the right route for me, because I really enjoyed the element of communicating what I was doing. So after that, I always wanted to step into communication roles, and notably I then worked for the BBC as a science TV researcher, and I was a researcher on a 4-part documentary about the cell, and I also worked as development, thinking up of scientific ideas for future documentaries. I'll probably become more of an expert in this quite niche field of being a community manager and focusing on science and building online communities around science. So I think it's very important. As I said earlier, it's still in its infancy, so there's a long way that we can come. So I guess in 5 years' time, I hopefully will see myself as even more of an expert, having done this for nearly 7 years than I was when I started after I'd graduated from university. So hopefully that's where I see myself in the future, continuing to communicate science in some capacity. My advice for someone starting out who wants to be a community manager is to make sure that you're up to date on everything that's going on in the arena. So that's subscribing to relevant blogs. If we're talking about being a community manager, it's worth keeping up to date on things like Mashable and TechCrunch, and really learning more about the industry and more about what's hot and what's not, what's working and what's not working. So it's about being on top of your game, so making sure that you're active on Twitter. On a personal standpoint, it's really important to build your own profile as well as if you're working for someone. So if you're looking for jobs, it's best to try and do as much research in that field as you can beforehand. I mean, this is a really good tip for anyone who's aspiring to be a community manager, is to find someone who has the job that you want and find out about their background. What did they do? How did they get to where they are? What kind of experience have they got that you haven't got? Can you build upon that? So that would be the best advice I can offer.